Birmingham is a city like no other. We have our own distinctive heritage, stories and landmarks, and are the proud home of some of the brightest creative pioneers past and present. We are also home to a diverse array of values, beliefs and traditions, creating a cultural offer that supports thousands of jobs, directly and indirectly. As the role of city centres change and lifestyles and work styles evolve, this sense of community and belonging will grow in importance. Through the evolution of our city, be it the development of new housing, parks and green spaces, or centres of culture and leisure, opportunities must be taken to tell the stories of all those who helped shape our city. We want to build and promote Birmingham as a city of layers, a city rich not just in diversity of people and stories, but in art, industry, food, music, technology and performance. Our City of Layers aims for 2040 include ensuring that opportunities for our rich arts, cultural and creative talent are embedded into city life and continue to be central to the social and economic future of central Birmingham. Maximising opportunities to build on the 2022 Commonwealth Games in order to create a strong sporting and community legacy, showcasing and promoting our cultural offer and unique heritage to external visitors in new and exciting ways.
Hello and welcome to this webinar, the fourth in a series that Birmingham City Council are producing, bringing together different voices from a range of communities and sectors in order to discuss the recently published Our City, Our Future, Shaping Our City Together 20-year plan for Birmingham. And today we are focusing on the City of Layers theme. I'm extremely pleased to be hosting this discussion as I feel it demonstrates Birmingham City Council's approach to engaging with a broad range of people and sectors, because this session is devoted to the cultural, creative and heritage sector, communities that often feel left out of the discussion, even though we can and do contribute different approaches and ways of thinking to the future of the city in many different ways. My name is Jez Collins, and I'm the founder of the Birmingham Music Archive, a creative and cultural and consultancy organisation that works across a variety of sectors in music, development and placemaking, and tourism. And I'm also the cultural lead for a major development project in Digbeth, which perhaps if we have time, we can talk about later, about how culture is leading the discussion in and for those developers. I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of artists, entrepreneurs, thinkers, and activists today. And I'll ask them to introduce themselves shortly. But before I do that, I want to emphasize that the purpose of this webinar is to hear those different voices and to engender feedback for the City Council to their Our City, Our Future plan. And I think the deliberate use of the word "our" is instructive here. So please do make sure your voice is heard by submitting your thoughts, ideas, suggestions, aspirations, constructive criticism, whatever it may be. And we'll give you at the end of the webinar those links where you can send those thoughts to. Before I start or introduce the panel, I just wanted to perhaps frame the discussion with giving you a sense of what culture is. It's often thought of as an add-on, as a bit of public art in development planning, but actually I tend to use UNESCO's definition of culture, and I'm going to read that out, and that's a way maybe into discussions that we're going to have. So UNESCO defines culture as the set of distinctive spiritual, material, intellectual and emotional features of a society or a social group that encompasses not only art and literature, but lifestyles, ways of living together, value systems, traditions, and beliefs. So I use that, as I say, because I don't think oftentimes we have these discussions and culture comes across as, like I say, public art, in a development or however that manifests itself. But culture is much more broad, and I think some of our panelists today will touch on that. Just having a quick look at a couple of the other sessions or webinars that have taken place. It's clear that culture and arts and community engagement is ripped through this plan and is cuts across all the themes within the Our City, Our Future plan. So again, culture is much more than just artists or community activists or community engagement or heritage sectors. We actually do cut across all these different disciplines and beliefs. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our fantastic panelists today. said he. If he can find his piece of paper, he's lost it. We're not in any particular order, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. We have Joe Capper, who is an artist and works at Grand Union Arts. We did have Despa Robinson, who is a music manager, label owner and entrepreneur. Unfortunately, Despa can't make it today. He's been ill. So our best wishes to you, Despa. We have Symon Easton, the head of cultural development at Birmingham City Council. Aftab Rahman, founding director of Legacy West Midlands and a community activist. And last but not by no means least, Deborah Broomfield, who's studying for a PhD in women and planning and is a freelance researcher investigating views around the feasibility of an English land commission, and who I also know as a community activist. So welcome to you all. And again, in your own words, just I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. So Deborah, just want to give a brief introduction before we kick off with the questions.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Deborah Broomfield. I live in Handsworth in Birmingham. I've been in Handsworth for a long time. I was born in Handsworth. I'm an inner city resident. I went back to university in 2018, graduated in 2019 with an MSc in urban and regional planning. I'm now, as Jez has mentioned, a doctorate student at Leeds Beckett University, specialising in women and planning. I'm also doing some freelance work around land, what land means to various stakeholders, including looking at the feasibility of an English land commission. And that's a joint initiative between the New Economics Foundation and Shared Assets.
Thank you, Deborah. Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Capper. Thanks for inviting me. Really pleased to be here and part of the discussion. I'm an artist and a curator, and I started working with Grand Union, which is an artist gallery and studio based in Digbeth, as their collaborative programme curator. And over the last 2.5 years, I've been building a new strategy for the gallery in terms of thinking through how it can develop new audiences for art. And we've been particularly focusing on how we can utilise the cultural capital that's been developed over the last 10 years in Digbeth to support and create visible platforms for thinking about the urgent issues in terms of social and environmental justice. I've founded and developed a project called the Growing Project, which is ultimately looking to, working with different people across the vulnerably housed community across Birmingham to sort of try and think about green sensing the city.
Thanks, Joe. And green is a big part of the city plan as well. So perhaps we can come back on that. Aftab.
Hi, Jess. My name is Aftab Rahman. I'm the director for Legacy West Midlands. We engage in heritage work, well-being, arts, and moving towards potentially housing as well in the near future. That's me.
Thank you. And Symon.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Symon Easton, Head of Cultural Development City Council. Been here for about 10 years. You can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from Birmingham. But I've worked in cultural development for about 35 or more years, too long to remember. So the main role at City Council is to look at the cultural strategy and policy for the city, which involves funding of the major arts organisation and also small projects across the city, working across a number of different themes that the council priorities have. We also look after the heritage contract for the museums across the city. We run the Film Birmingham office. We also look after the public art portfolio that we have, and get involved in lots of events and activities across the city, including commissioning the annual Black History Month and the annual Heritage Week. That's me.
Thank you, Symon. And perhaps I'll start with you then, Symon. The Our City, Our Future document talks about Birmingham being unique and distinct. So I'll ask, is that right? You know, are we unique and distinct? And if we are, what sorts of examples would you say make us unique and distinct? And of course, we might not be, so please do say if you don't think we are unique.
Well, I think yes is the answer to that. Having worked in a number of different cities up and down the country, each has its own distinct character and sort of place identity, of course. But I think Birmingham in particular, from a very practical point of view, its location in the centre of England is a distinct advantage, actually, and unique in the sense that, I don't know, a Liverpool of this world, only has 180 degrees catchment. Birmingham in the West Midlands has got 360 degrees. And with that, we've got excellent road, rail and transport links. So there's a real advantage there for us to be able to continue to capitalise on. But aside from that practical point, it is, it sounds like a broken record, but it is a very diverse city, not just in terms of the demographics of the population, but in terms of the geographical spread. It's one of the largest sort of cities in terms of geographical spread. And in that, you've got quite distinct areas. So I say that's a positive. Within that, we've got the distinctiveness of our industrial heritage. To state the obvious, the canals, the manufacturing heritage, these are all things that we should celebrate and are of a great opportunity for us to celebrate that distinctiveness. And then there's our cultural heritage, and too many things to talk about. But if I just talk in your field, Jez, talk about the music heritage. Sorry, my computer's just doing something silly. But we've got the heritage of the bands across the city. Everything from the Black Sabbath of this world to Duran Duran, Bhangra, developed in this city, ELO, UB40, more recently the Twang and Laura Mvula and those sorts of people. So fantastic cultural heritage. And then there's the sports heritage, the Edgbastons of this world, the cricket, the football heritage, two of the oldest clubs, the oldest lawn tennis club in the city, in the UK rather. The breadth of our cultural offer, the festivals, too many to mention, but obviously festivals of all different natures and crossing different cultures, religious festivals as well. Very, very unique in this city and a big opportunity for us to celebrate. And last but not least, our food heritage in terms of the distinctiveness of the Balti Triangle is an obvious statement, of course, and especially to those living in the city. But I think it is an example of where we as a city can really celebrate our culture.
Thanks, Simon. I mean, that begs a question then, Simon. Perhaps I want to just follow up on that. Is there too much? I mean, just some of the things that you've laid there, does that make it hard for someone like you who in that position to have a handle on it all, or for us to be able to market? Or we talk about in our city plan about branding, the Birmingham brand. Do we have too much? Is that possible?
No, I don't think so, Jez. I think there are areas of these distinctiveness different areas that we should celebrate for different audiences. The messages that we have appeal to different people of different ages, different cultures, different creeds, whatever. So it's great to have all of these things that appeal to different people's interests, if you like, who are interested in, and I'm going to use this word, experiences. I talk from a personal point of view here, but I feel people are very much after experiences. Now, whether that be their cultural experience or their historic experience or their culinary experience, we've got so much in this city. I'd actually go as far to say, Jez, I think we're undersold. We undersell ourselves in Birmingham, and that's something that we need to address.
Thanks, Simon. After, if I can turn to you, you work within that sphere. And so, Simon's mentioned a lot of heritage, industrial heritage, sports heritage, food heritage, some of our music heritage, our cultural heritage. And I know that you cross a lot of those. And I wonder if you get your sense about what you think of Birmingham. Are we unique? Are we distinct? If we are, how do we, celebrate that and, tell the world about that?
So firstly, I think Simon's stolen the thunder from all of us. He's spoken very eloquently for all of us. I certainly think we are unique. I certainly agree with Simon that we're not doing a great sales pitch here. We're underselling ourselves in many aspects. I don't fully think that we've arrived yet. We're not comfortable with our identity as a city. We're still struggling, and It's a multi-layered city which is growing and continues to grow. And I think it's evolving. Each period of migration from across the world adds to another layer of this city, which I love, and it brings new flavors to the city. The most recent one is the Italian Bangladeshis who've come and settled around Los Alces, Handsworth and Small Heath, and they bring the unique mix of coffee shops and Bangladeshi street foods. Where would you get that blend normally? So it's great. I certainly agree we're unique, but we're not branded in the way that we could be branded. And I don't think we've fully embraced all the cultures and the traditions that we have to offer as a city. Not to take up too much time, I think what you have is the heart of the city, and you're served by the arteries of the city. So you've got the A41 and the Coventry Road. If you go on the A41, which is a Soho Road, it's like a gateway into India. And you go the other side and you go to Coventry Road, you've got a gateway to Pakistan, Bangladesh, the Middle East. There's so much on offer. And as Simon said, it's what you offer to people, So I'll stop there because I know there's lots of other people who have lots to add.
Well, perhaps we'll pick up on that because I love that idea about the journey, through the city by understanding its, networks and its arteries, and of course, again, the idea of this next 20 years for the city is to perhaps break down those barriers that stop those communities coming into the city and vice versa. So perhaps we'll pick up on that discussion. And perhaps Deborah, I'll turn to you for this question as well. Then, as a planner, as you said, you've lived in Handsworth all of your life. What sorts of culture is reflected in those communities, in your communities? Does it change? Is it static? What's the role of people like yourself who are now studying planning to bring those voices in to the city and its cultures?
I think, first of all, I need to say I'm coming at this from a Deborah's perspective. I'm not representing any organisation or angle to things, but as I say, I've been living in Handsworth. Actually, I was born in Handsworth, living in Handsworth for a long time. I think from my perspective, there is, I quite agree with what Simon says and Aftab says, in terms of there is an element of uniqueness. But I also think we've forgotten a legacy. Because there is an eagerness, this is only from my perspective, to transform without actually remembering the legacy. And what I mean by legacy is that my parents came here in the 1950s and we settled. There has been a lot of African people of Caribbean. At that time, it was Caribbean ancestry, people from the Caribbean who settled in inner cities and places like Handsworth and brought a particular culture, a particular flavour, as well as their counterparts from other countries. And I think we've forgotten that. I was quite surprised to learn quite recently that I know that we're not talking about the part of Handsworth that I'm in, but I think this is quite relevant, that Handsworth, the Soho Road, I know it's an iconic road, but the Soho Road was likened to 125th Street in New York. We've not actually captured that. I also think that it's an icon. There's a lot about the city, but it's also a divided city. I mean, I was born here. It's a divided city, and I'm not sure if we've actually permeated those layers. And I think it's going to take a long time to do that. I think we've forgotten the young, and there's a lot of young up and coming visionaries, culturalists that are doing great things in not just in Handsworth, but in Birmingham. I'm hoping to see that we do remember that those exist in the strategy, whatever this strategy is.
Thanks, Deborah. You've raised some really important points there, and I'm going to pick up on this in the next question. I just want to give Joe the opportunity to answer the first question, because you've all three have actually opened up a whole range of really important questions that we'll get to the nub of. But Joe, just in terms of this sense of the city and its uniqueness and its distinctiveness, as someone who works across the city, do you have this sense? Is it unique? Is it distinct? If so, how do we perhaps, tell these stories in a coherent way that tells the rest of the country and internationally what Birmingham is all about?
Yeah, I mean, to sort of respond a little bit to Deborah, that sort of, I think one way that we can really help to sort of amplify and platform some of those stories that aren't heard is really thinking about how we can be inclusive, both social and economically, and I think that will help to sort of support some of those younger practices, ideas and thinking, and how we I guess sort of can create those structures in order for those to really flourish, and so I think that sort of that uniqueness is really challenged a little bit by sort of economic force, in the sense that sort of redevelopment and its current narrative and how it takes shape is often very much dependent upon economic privilege. And so I think until we can start to sort of really genuinely and honestly sort of build those sort of fair, inclusive approaches as a city that sort of takes on all individuals and histories and legacies, that sort of that won't take shape. And I think that we really have to tackle some of the difficulties of the post-industrial city, that sort of some of those histories and narratives in terms of how the wealth was built through the Industrial Revolution is actually really complicated and traumatic for some peoples. And I think we sort of probably have to do some difficult work as well as sort of celebrate.
Thanks, Joe. It's really interesting to hear these, because I'm just going to read a little bit from the actual Our City, Our Future planning in the City of Layers, and you've all mentioned the multitude and the depth of layers in the city. But it says, as the role and purpose of the city centres change and lifestyles and work styles merge and evolve, it is the sense of community and belonging, the social interactions experienced through culture at all levels, that people will want to come to cities for. Social activity is an essential part of the attraction of city life. So just picking up on what particularly Deborah and Joe, you've just said, and I'm going to ask Aftab this first. We talk, or there's a lot of talk about hard to reach communities, but we know they exist. We know where they exist. So how do we ensure that their voices, their history, their contributions to the city, however problematic that may be, however traumatic that may be, are heard, perhaps elevated and amplified? And I think that goes to some of what Deborah was talking about how we're losing or we've forgotten a lot of these stories. So I know that's a bit of a big question, but after, I wonder if you, through your work, could give us an insight into that.
Yeah, I think just to paint a picture, we set up Legacy 11 years ago. And the reason we did it, all right, was through at my living room. It was to collect stories of Bangladeshi people who had first arrived in the UK. And I realized that there wasn't many books in that community. So that's why we set up what we did. And it kind of grew from there. So, and the reason is that we wanted to share our own stories. We didn't want academics and others waxing lyrical about what we live and breathe. We want to be able to tell our own story, and that's what we have been doing as an organization. Now, this hard to reach is really problematic for me, and it's been one of my campaign issues for the last 30 years. One of my biggest issues is whenever there's jobs creation, jobs and so on, you usually find people, an organization, fly into an area, a bit of a vulture kind of scenario that's happened through regeneration for years. My thing is, why don't we employ local people to reach local people? You know, we often get calls like, yes, after we're struggling with reaching the community. I said, well, who have you employed? A middle-class white man. How do you think they're going to penetrate our communities with all these years of mistrust that's happened? And, you know, and in some instances, they say, after we get it, can you help us? And we've gone in and we've helped. So what happens if you take the city centre where most of the wealth is? It's surrounded by some of the poorest communities in the country. And yet what you find is at 5 o'clock, there's economic migration. People literally leave the city with their wealth. They don't shop in Soho Road, they go and shop in Hampshire or wherever they live. That we have to stop, right? We have to really, really start thinking about, okay, employment is coming to our cities. How do we ensure local people get those jobs? Once you've got local people getting those jobs, then you've got access to local knowledge. That's the difference in my view. And I think we can get it right. When HSBC announced they're coming to Birmingham as their headquarters, we rolled out the red carpet. Could we have said, fantastic, you're coming, but will you employ 50% local people from the nearby communities? Imagine the difference that would have made. The economic, the environmental difference it would have made, because if you can imagine people walking from Ladywood into city centre, they've walked there. That's had a big impact on the environment. I know there's issues around environment and it will be picked up later, but local people is the key. And the one last thing we say is, you know, we're not going to say, you know what, you're not from the city, you can't have a job here. Once you do get a job here in the city, walk the streets you serve, walk it, smell it, feel it. These are the people you serve. And then you'll start to get a feel for what you are really doing and connect with the people that you aim to serve, not just leave at 5. I'll stop there.
Thanks, After. I'm going to broaden this question out, and it might be a difficult question, but I'm interested in your initial thoughts. Picking up on what After has mentioned around, you know, the economic access to economics and within those local communities that surround the city centre. What's clear in this proposed or in this new strategy is actually the broadening out of the city core to those surrounding areas like Les Owls, Handsworth, Paulsall Heath, Pawsley Green. How can we as cultural, creative, heritage planners, you know, have an impact and inform this report to make sure that does trickle down and that those communities are served, that those barriers are reduced? Can we use art, culture and creativity to help us do that? And Simon, perhaps I'll start with you on this question.
Yes, very much so, in my opinion. I mean, my whole sort of 15 or 20 years working in local government has been about sort of engaging with people through culture, using the value of arts and cultural activity, including heritage activities, to reach people at a level that they feel comfortable with, that they want to engage with, rather than sort of talking down to them from culture, but using culture as the mechanism for people to feel much more comfortable in getting involved in not only their local community, but in activities for their own sake and mental health and well-being. And particularly in areas of high deprivation, which obviously go hand in hand with low cultural engagement for various reasons. It's not just economic, there are lots of reasons. Lots of cold spots for culture in areas of high deprivation. And people getting access to culture physically by transport is even difficult. Because of the transport links aren't at the right time, or indeed economically too expensive for people to use. So I would say that culture at a local level is really important. Celebrating local culture. What culture means to one person in a neighbourhood, it may not mean the same thing to somebody else in an adjacent, perhaps more affluent neighbourhood. that what their local culture is should be appreciated and celebrated. And the City Council is doing a lot of good work. I mean, I obviously work in cultural development, and we commission cultural projects. We've got Culture on Our Doorstep as a theme, which is literally reaching adults in areas of high deprivation. We've got the cultural diversity theme, which is about bringing on people from a culturally diverse background who haven't necessarily managed to get a foothold in the cultural agenda as such. But there are other teams across the city, such as Neighbourhoods team, the refugee and migrants team, the homelessness team, who are all doing really good work in reaching communities. And it's part of our statutory responsibility, although culture isn't a statutory responsibility. The local authority across its various departments and service areas has a responsibility to reach these underrepresented people in areas of high deprivation. As far as bringing them into the city centre, Jez, if that's your question, it's challenging, without a doubt, because people very much associate, I think, with their own neighbourhoods in the first instance, and don't even necessarily travel across to other neighbourhoods that are more accessible. The city centre has to have an offer that is appealing to those people, that is also relevant and is affordable. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Simon. Joe, and I'll come back on a point you've made there in a minute, Simon. So, Joe, again, you work across the city, and you use arts, and it cuts across health. So you mentioned earlier environmental, social justice, and I wonder if you could pick up on that. And how do we, taking on board what Aftab and Simon have said, is there a bigger role for culture in its broadest sense to be supported in those neighbourhoods? There's a concept of the 15-minute city, where you have access to services, within 15 minutes of your door. But sometimes, as Simon said, culture is not a statutory requirement. So how does your work inform that? And how can we think, thinking again about the plan, how can we inform that plan to say, actually, culture is not just the big shiny buildings in the city centre, but it's actually embeddedness within our local communities?
I'm not sure I have the whole answer, but I guess I can talk through the experience of the Growing Project and sort of, I think, in terms of the things that it's achieved. When I started the job at Grand Union 2.5 years ago, I was really struck by the sort of visibility and presence of the issue of homelessness really in the city centre. And sort of, I think I was privileged in the role that I was given, in the sense that I was able to sort of really think about a strategy in terms of how culture might sort of address some of those issues. And so spent some time really thinking and sort of being with that community. Like Aftab said, it's so important to sort of be on that street and on that level in terms of really thinking from there. And so and coming from a background in terms of community organisation development, know that sort of when you work directly with people and listen and think and then develop something from that sort of, true culture sort of happens, and true intersections between sort of different understanding and thinking happens. And so very quickly we sort of started to sort of find spaces to grow and grow different foods and vegetables and sort of in the city. And suddenly we was able, through sort of working with people who were resident in hostels, who were probably seen as sort of difficult issues to overcome, that sort of they could start to develop a sense of sort of almost civic pride, of sort of feeling part of something. And I think that's sort of what we need to try and do, is find opportunities for people to be included in and taking part. I don't think culture, I think, we need to think what everybody has culture. Everybody eats and breathes and dresses every single day. And so they have their own unique understanding of it. So I think we need to widen how we think about it and who are the gatekeepers that holds that very sort of sense of culture, and start to appreciate that, culture happens every single day in everybody's life, in their house, in where they live, in how they choose to speak, what they listen to. yeah, I've gone off on one.
No, that's great. And perhaps I'm going to pick up on this. I'm going to ask you again, Joe, and then turn to Deborah. But you talked about include, and after has talked about included in, you know. But how, if you're watching this webinar, or you're someone who, you know, from another part of the city, or you are a policy maker or a planner or developer, how do you do included in? What do you do? What does that mean? How do you go and find? How do you work with hostels? You know, what's the role of, you know, the relationship? How do you work with the Italian Bangladeshis, which I've never heard of before until today, and I need to go down to Lazar's and have an Italian Bangladeshi. You know, what's the process of that? How can we make those communities or engage those communities in meaningful ways? And that's a question to everyone, but perhaps Joe, I'll start with you.
Do you know what? It's human kindness. It's sort of just being very open and sort of also being able to relinquish something of your own subjectivity in order to join with somebody else. And I think if you can have that sort of friendly, genuine, open, honest approach, I think you can connect with anybody. I sort of put me in a room and I'll make friends with anybody.
Deborah, I ask you the same question, this idea about included in, you know, how do we do that? How do we, you know, we as in the broadest sense, you know, engage meaningfully with different communities? And of course, in somewhere like Handsworth, there's not one community, there are many communities, and that's true across the city.
Okay, in terms of being included in, I think this takes it depends on the information you want, of course, and it takes time. And interestingly, I've been having quite a few different conversations with different people, and they talk about trust, and they need to be able to trust who it is that's requesting that information. What's also surprised me, and I think it's the same story that somebody like myself has been through, sort of being of Caribbean parentage, but technically a Brummie, being born in Birmingham, is the disconnect that still some people and young people are feeling. And it's how do we, when I say we, whoever decision makers are, if they're placemakers or cultural practitioners, how do you get over, work with that disconnect? And I've been quite surprised that, and they're not hard to reach communities. I don't think there's such a thing as hard to reach. It's, do we want to reach them? And at what point do we want to reach them? Because I think you can reach anybody if you really want to reach them. I think really that the key word that I've picked up, it's trust. There's a distrust sometimes of authority, what's seen as authority. I think also this slightly overlaps with what Joe has said. It's who owns the knowledge. We've got to be able to trust that who it is we're speaking to also owns knowledge, and it's their lived experience. They may have a better knowledge of the technical processes than so-called professionals have, and it's been able to let go of some of that ego to be able to bring in that knowledge.
Thanks, Deborah. Symon, I'll turn to you then as a representative of a big organisation. How do you earn the trust of those communities? I mean, I imagine it's a very complex set of processes that you have to go through. And if we think about, again, want to bring it back to this, our discussion today about the new city plan that's looking 20 years ahead for the city. It's both its built environment, but also its brand and its economics, its jobs, its education, its health. How does how does an organisation like the City Council work in those areas? Is it possible for it to be able to work in those communities and earn that trust? And then two, how do you turn that into definable actions?
Yeah, well, I agree with what Deborah's just said there. And just to repeat what I said earlier, I think that we need to use culture to break down the barriers between communities and even within communities at a level that they, using culture and the arts at a level that they can associate or is meaningful to them. And that helps then engender trust. And there are obvious, and I'm sorry to teach everybody to suck eggs here, but there are obvious common mediums that we have, whether it be food or music or arts, that are prevalent in all of our communities, that you can have a cross-cultural discussion around, an appreciation of, etc. Going back to Aftab's earlier point, I am a middle class male, and therefore that does make it very difficult for me as an individual to be able to go into certain communities and to gain trust. So we're a very small team anyway. So we have local arts fora across the city in each of the 10 what were districts, and we use the local arts residents in those neighbours, arts organisations, Legacy being one of them, Grand Union to a certain extent, who we fund to deliver work in those communities, and therefore they are trusted by those communities. And I think this word trust is very important, that as a resident from a particular community or from a particular area, you don't necessarily trust what you might see as the authority. And therefore it's important to us to use those agents that we have, employ those agents, such as many wonderful arts organizations in this city and arts and artists individuals to deliver that, not deliver that message necessarily, but to help those communities understand the areas of subject matter that we want them to become, whether it be about sort of giving a sort of healthy well-being message, or just about engaging more in your community, or indeed tackling loneliness and isolation. The arts and culture medium is a wonderful way of being able to bring people out and amongst each other. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Simon. And after same question to you, I know it's very close to your heart in terms of this sense of how organisations or institutions sometimes are parachuted in to areas with no understanding, no connections with local communities. How would you, as a cultural organisation, break that down? How would you welcome those people? How do you make those connections to people? How do you get perhaps commissioned to be the people or the organisations who help these organisations learn about communities?
Okay, so I'll use a couple of examples. So we've got the Commonwealth Games on our doorsteps, literally. And I met with the chief exec and some of the senior staff. And I said, look, can we induct your staff? And, and we've got an induction program which talks about the heritage of the city and how it's changed over the years. And we then take them on a walk and then come back and debrief. And we'd agreed to do all of this. And then COVID happened. So it's been put on the back burner. Recently, what they've done is they've employed community engagement workers. So I messaged, I said, look, you've got these community engagement officers. Why don't you second them to us for 2 days a week? And they'll become part of our team. And I met a senior member of staff and they loved the idea. They said, yes, it should happen. And then they went back to their organization and said, well, HR won't allow it because they're under a certain contract and so on. So my thing is, most areas you'll find have these anchor organizations who have been working there for 20, 30 years. They've got a level of trust in the community. Work through them, build partnerships and see what you can do with the resources that are there. And if it means actually, I think it's a really nice model to second staff in and say, look, we'll give you 2 days of our staff member who then can actually access all the networks from a position of trust. So perhaps just think about new ways of working and embracing change in a new, meaningful way.
Is that easier said than done, though? Is it difficult? And again, for the three of you, Deb, Joe, and Aftab, perhaps less with you, Deb, but is it difficult? You know, on the other hand, so we're talking about organisations making connections with, you know, yourselves, artists, creative and cultural organisations. Is it sometimes difficult to for you to make those connections in such big, you know, organisations who have their own set agendas, who are doing their own work? And are there ways or good practices that you know of that actually, you know, we can share and we can be a model of good practice, you know, in Birmingham about how we connect organisations to local, you know, artists, creative organisations, cultural organisations? Joe, I'll ask you for that question first.
I would agree with Aftab. I think seconding staff is like an amazing sort of redistribution of resources, and I'd love to see it sort of happening all over the city. And there's so much potential in terms of the corporate sector. I mean, the corporate sector has like sort of CSR, corporate responsibility, and I think that sort of easily we could sort of adapt that. But within the city council as well, I sort of think in terms of how culture can really lead the way in connecting other sort of sectors and sort of departments. But I think within the work that I've been doing, that it's really important not to come along and sort of replicate. We're an artist studio and gallery. We can't resolve homelessness, but what we can do is support the organisations that are doing the work and create a bit of visibility for them. And I think it's really important to, I guess, in terms of, you know, when you relinquish that ego or sort of think about your own subjectivity in order to connect and sort of with a wider understanding. And I think, yeah, not just sort of replicate and take over, but really look in terms of how those different things can come together and create more. So it's like more than the sum of its parts.
Thanks, Joe. I'll change tack a little bit there, because you've all spoken about, you know, money, about trust, about building it, about the disconnect, and it strikes me that this then turns into, you know, sort of the elephant in the room, and that's about, you know, money and about how these things are funded. But whether it's, you know, physically making those connections with those, you know, it takes it'll take your time to go and make these connections and partnerships. Same with you, Joe. Symon, we know that the local authorities have been decimated through austerity. So are there ways? So this idea about secondment and perhaps taking, you know, corporate social responsibility, just with the idea about planning and development, you know, just so we bring it back to the Our City, Our Future. Are there things that you think we could incorporate as models of good practice that starts doing this? So it's actually less about money, but more about brokerage, perhaps. And Symon, I might ask you that first in terms of, you know, your role in the city council. So, you know, I know that money is always important, but perhaps actually organisations like the city council, you know, can offer leverage and brokerage to set up these types of partnerships. And then I'll come and ask Deb after.
Yes is a short answer. I mean, obviously we have a role to play in building a sense of place for people, to give them a sense of pride and identity in their place, giving a sense of community cohesion, encouraging engagement and activity. I've said earlier, sort of including, you know, improving active health and activity and mental health and well-being, but also citizenship and volunteering. In terms of that sort of building-based element of this, for me, it's not about losing the heritage of the city, but celebrating it. But it's also about bringing sort of new and different experiences into the city. For example, off the top of my head, you know, what will the virtual reality, augmented reality field bring to us in future to engage people and give them different experiences? We also need to look at the improvement about public realm, streetscape. I think the streetscape in Birmingham is pretty bad generally, but also looking at sort of installations of really good and interesting public art that pique people's interest and attract visitors. Pedestrianisation, improving pedestrianisation, improving green spaces. I know that the Future City Plan has got that down as a target, and I think that would be applauded, because people in a busy city centre need places of refuge and places of quiet where they can get away from the busy day or the noise and bustle of a city. But we also need affordable cultural workspaces to attract our best creative talent and to allow artists to sort of flourish. As I said before, building on the experience factor from a visitor point of view. You know, the Peaky Blinders around the Digbeth area is just an example where, you know, of an experience that we should capitalise on that's unique to perhaps Birmingham. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there, Jez. I hope that answers your question.
It was an impossible question, to be honest. You know, trying to sort out, ways forward is very difficult. But we have to be mindful that, you know, an organisation as big as the city council or the public organisation, you know, funds are tight. But I think that's true also in the arts and creative sector. So, you know, these discussions may help new ideas sort of form and come through. I'm going to change that question slightly as opposed it to you, Deborah, and you might not be able to answer. So just say, you know, this is not your area. But I wonder the role of community assets that the city council might hold. We mentioned earlier they have. Their finances have been straightened. But what about buildings, you know, physical buildings around the city that the council might own, and maybe could be thought of as community assets and turning those into spaces and places that you've all mentioned, whether they're growing spaces, whether they're incubation spaces, whether they're art spaces. I wonder if you any thoughts on that, Deborah?
You're right in saying that's not my area. However, I mean, there were some points that I would have liked to have added to your previous question, if that's okay, if that's fine. I made a note about this issue about culture and public asset, not so much public assets, but public art and culture. And I wrote down a key word about appropriation. And I think there could be an issue of, because there is such a thing as austerity planning, and planning is moving towards more of a development process. Okay, you do have community planning for community needs, but there needs to be a way of statutory bodies and governments making money through planning, and it is development. And it is possible to appropriate culture and appropriate art in order to make money. I think that's a potential challenge in facilitating authentic art and culture, and it goes back to trust. So I think that all culture must be authentic, and the word authenticity is very important. In terms of assets and public assets, I mean, I'm not a big expert, but I am aware of there is a movement towards looking at how land can be differently managed. I know that is happening at the moment, and they're possibly looking at ways of how assets which are due to COVID-19, which have been left empty, you know, businesses failing, how we can use that for the public good. Then again, it becomes an issue of trust, a trust between statutory bodies and also the communities. I think the communities need to be trusted that they know. There's an importance about building resilience. I'm wondering how much resilience do we actually build? We regenerate, but do we build the resilience of those communities and instill trust in them that they can manage those assets?
That's a great point, Deborah, and I'm going to put that actually to Aftab in terms of, you know, this sense of, do you feel that you are a trusted organisation, that you have the trust of, you know, those bigger organisations, and in more general, and would you be trusted in terms of, you know, managing community assets? Because that is a really important point. You have the skills and knowledge and the connections, but do you feel actually that you are an organisation that is trusted to be able to do those types of activities and run those types of buildings? And are you also aware, and this is also for Joe, are you aware of, you know, the ability to be able to repurpose some community assets in, you know, around Les Halles, and what would you do if you could get your hands on them?
Okay, so this is really, really interesting. Are we trusted? I think we are. We've been going for 11 years. We have good governance. As it happens, Deborah was on our board for a while. We've reorganized our charity. We're now a charitable incorporated organization, which means that we can own, we can trade, and it limits the liability on our board members. So we've changed as an organization. This trust doesn't happen overnight, you know. In your introduction, you mentioned I'm an activist. I am, and sometimes I ruffle a few feathers, and it's done with integrity and honesty. I will champion and campaign for the local communities I work in. I will champion and campaign for the Bangladeshi community, which is my heritage, actually. And we're working on a project with Symon, which funding is coming through eminently for this. But it's a journey, you know, it's an absolute journey, and it will, it's all good and well to say, give us the resources, we'll manage it. The truth is, not everybody has the skill sets to manage, and we need to be honest about that. We're now looking to become a housing association. There's 9 Georgian houses on Hampstead Road that we're trying to buy, and we're speaking with the council to see if they will give us a grant to do this. And the aim then is to put large families in those houses. And ultimately, what we want to do is save those houses for future generations to enjoy, but also secure the future of legacy. When you own assets, people take you seriously, as opposed to not owning assets, you know. And we want to diversify our income. We want to do a lot more. We want to be an anchor organization in the city. And we want to, in the next 3 to 5 years, we want to be a mini BVSC in the northwest of Birmingham, because some of the larger organizations can't touch and feel the organizations around here that we can. We certainly don't have all the answers, but we have set ourselves some really, really ambitious goals to grow and develop. And this whole journey is quite tiring. You know, I don't expect people to trust us just like that because I've called them or what have you. It takes time, and we're on a journey together to learn. And what we do also is we tell people where we're vulnerable. We don't know the housing agenda. This is an area that we're learning. So I'm very open, and I said, look, this is what we want to do, but we don't know how to get there. Can you help us? 9 times out of 10, people will come out and say, Aftab, I can help you with that. So for example, our housing plans are being supported by Housing 21, which is a major housing association coming into Les Halles, where they're building houses for 55-plus-year-olds to support older people. And they've come to us and said, Aftab, we can't engage with the community, we don't know them. I said, look, we'll do it for you. So, you know, work to our strengths, and we'll work to your strengths, and we'll support each other to grow. So it's just a quick example I thought I'd share with you there.
That's fascinating, and you know, perhaps something to take away from this discussion is about how perhaps developers, we want to go back to this. We are talking about a strategy for the next 20 years around how the city and the city core and the outside areas develop, around economics, about the built environment, about culture. So, there are ways in there, after, I think, that you're providing people who might be, who sit outside the cultural, creative and heritage sectors, can start thinking about, well, actually we can work with these sectors, with these organisations, because we can learn from them as much as they can learn from us. So it's a fantastic example there. Joe, I wanted to throw it back again just to you. It's the same sort of question, because I know that Grand Union, after I was mentioning about you owning your assets, and suddenly, the world's a different place. And I know Grand Union have been working hard to own their space in Digbeth. But I also interested in your views about, is there potential around unlocking, community assets, whatever they may be, that the city council might hold. And also, we haven't mentioned it yet, but and again, this might not be your area of expertise, but the role of Section 106 and SIL money within this. Is there ways of, I don't want to say diverting, but using that money that developers have to pay in as part of their development plan to identify particular areas or particular organisations that they can make, rather than money just sitting there and perhaps not being used for the purposes it was? That's a long-winded question, so apologies about that, but yeah.
There's lots to respond to there. I mean, I think essentially starting with sort of development and regeneration, and set within the context of Digbeth. Digbeth is probably the area in Birmingham that's most likely to sort of probably come up against this notion of regeneration, and sort of partly the way that Grand Union created my role, and also started conversations with sort of developers in order to start to learn from those processes, and also ask the question if art could be used in a more genuine and integral part of that process, so it's not just seen as something that is decorating the side of a building or that comes afterwards. So some of the way that we're sort of working with that, Grand Union, we invited 2 developers to be part of our board and help us to sort of develop that sort of security of place. And so we began a conversation 3 years ago with Homes England to sort of we created an option to buy the Canal Office, which is set within Digbeth. And we're still working through that process, but essentially what that will do is secure space and land in Digbeth at a time when sort of I guess land value will increase, will rise because of HS2 and all the other redevelopment that's happening in that area. But I think that sort of the way that we think about it is finding ways that sort of we can create real, genuine, community-led decision-making processes within that approach to development. And one way that we're doing that, we're working with a wider Digbeth community group called Digbeth Access Group, and we've created a new lighting and wayfinding scheme for Digbeth. Even though, that sort of essentially we're sort of creating potential value in the public realm in the future for the 3 major landowners in Digbeth, but we're doing that until you start sort of building that community-led decision-making process. We can't sort of change the narrative of sort of regeneration or redevelopment, or even these big city plans are often top-down approaches, that they're sort of individual people and knowledges that are making decisions about what should be there. And I guess that our sort of main stimulus for that is to build more inclusive communities, that sort of, so that in the future, wouldn't it be great in Digbeth if the vulnerably housed or people in crisis were sort of supported in the same way as people who were coming to sort of view culture, in the same way that people who use the canals and sort of the nature ways in the city, in the same way that people who have a higher income and sort of entering into sort of more luxury accommodations. And I think that's where sort of we need to head towards is that we really think about the multiplicity of community and how we can create structures that allows for all of that to happen side by side. Gone off the mark again.
That was fantastic. That was a great answer. We're close to our allotted time now, so I'm going to give one last question. I'll keep changing what I'm going to ask, but I think, again, with in mind that this is a discussion around, or the fourth in a series of webinars for the Our City, Our Future plan. As cultural, and I include, Symon on those, the City Council as an organisation, but what message would you want to leave people who might be watching this, who are developers, who are planners? I know, Deborah, you sit sort of within that world, but what message would you give those organisations who wanted to perhaps engage with a cultural heritage creative organisation, around their work? What can we offer that world in terms of perhaps making them think differently, and why should they bother, I suppose, is what I'm asking you. And I'll start with Aftab on that one.
It's really not fair, Jess, because you were looking at Symon and then you threw me in the deep. I thought, we'll wait till Symon gives us all the answers. I looked at the questions and so on, and the one thing I want to share, it said, what 3 words would describe Birmingham and 3 places? If I do that,
you answer that one, then that's fine, because I did change it at the last minute. You answer that one if that's better.
Okay, so for me, it's the 3 words: young, vibrant, and diverse. That for me is Birmingham. And then you also asked the 3 places that I take people, right? This may well surprise you. If a visitor came, I would take them to the library and all that beauty around all of that built environment and all that space. The second place I'd take them to is Lascelles. And the reason I'd take them there is because 25 years ago, 26 years ago, a third of the shops were destroyed because of the riots, a third. And now you'll struggle to find an empty unit in Lascelles. So what a story, what a fantastic story about resilience, economic growth, and so on. And you then go to city centre, which is forever reinventing itself with all its money, and you'll probably find a third of the shops are empty now. And the other place I'd take them to is Coventry Road, because you go through Middle Eastern culture, cuisine, and then you've got Pakistani culture, cuisine, and then you've got Bangladeshi culture, cuisine. And it's just amazing how this whole city has these different layers of culture, heritage, food, arts that can be embraced upon. And in terms of what I would say to developers is don't do the usual stuff about following the money. Actually think about what you can embrace. I mean, one of the biggest developments going in now is Hockley Loop, or is it Port Loop?
Port Loop, yeah. Port
Loop. Jez, an average house there costs 400,000. How are we supposed to afford that as a common man and woman in this city? That's clearly targeting those upward mobile people who have moved to the jewelry quarter from wherever, and now they're ready for a family. They can move to those. What kind of communities are we building? Gated communities. There was all sorts of work being done around creating those spaces, but then you prize local people out. We have to ensure that local people can have a stake in these places. Otherwise, they'll become, privilege of rich people. And that's not a city that I want. I want a city that's inclusive. I want a city that I can walk, I can cycle around, I can afford. I want my daughters to have spaces in the city that they can afford, and that's the biggest challenge, making it affordable. or having a clause to say, well, if you're from Birmingham, we're going to give you 20% off. Something crazy like that. You know, if you live within 3 mile or 5 mile radius, we will make sure that we can sustain the community, we can sustain the connections that it has and all of that, instead of just kind of creating these really nice villages that we can't access. I'll stop there, Jess.
Fantastic, thank you, Aftab. So I was looking at you first, Simon. You can go next, and feel free just to go with the first part, the three words and 3 places that you might describe Birmingham as.
Yeah, I will do. I'll come back to that question that you asked, Jez, because it's important to me. I think in terms of developers, I'd like them to not focus on the short-term profit gain, but the longer-term investment or return on their investment. And that means, as Aftab's referred to, engaging genuinely with the communities and having honest and open consultation to therefore create areas that people want to live, work, and play. And so, you know, have genuine improvements to the public realm, to the pedestrianisation and the development of green spaces, to, you know, affordable cultural workspaces that I talked about earlier. There are too many places in Birmingham, and indeed many other cities across the country, that are just anodyne. You know, they lack character, they lack distinctiveness, all for the sake of, you know, developers. And I'm not painting all developers with the same brush here, but, you know, for the sake of a quick return on a profit on a singular development, without thinking about the longer term attractiveness and livability of a space. So that's what I would ask for in that question. In terms of the 3 words to Birmingham, I would say undersold, diverse, and aspirational. I think Birmingham is an aspirational city, and the future city plan has a lot of that aspiration and ambition in it, which is really encouraging and aspiring to, or inspiring, should I say. The 3 places I would take a person to, a first-time visitor, one would be the canals, because it's a nice place in the city centre to go for a walk and a leisurely stroll, but also it sort of exemplifies some of the brilliant heritage that the city's got to sell. And I'm not just saying this because we run the museum's contract, but I would definitely take them to the Birmingham Museum of Art and I can't even say it, Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery, BMAG, to see, you know, anything from the Staffordshire Hoard to the Pre-Aphrolite collection. You know, you take your pick. We've got one of the best collections in this country. And then Centenary Square, obviously that's just been redeveloped, but not necessarily for the square itself, which is fine. But around that square, you've got the Library of Birmingham, an iconic building. You've got the new Symphony Hall frontage that's just been developed, the Rep Theatre, one of our national institutions, and across the road, soon to be the University of Birmingham's new centre there in the city centre for the Midlands, the old Midlands Bank as was. So those would be the 3 places that I would take. I'm going to say 4 because I agree with Aftab. I think you can't come to Birmingham, not go to the Balti Triangle. That's me.
Thank you, Simon. That's fantastic. Deborah, same question to you, and feel free to answer whichever parts, no parts that you'd like to.
Right, I need to remember what some of the questions are. But let me start with 3 places that I'd take a new visitor to. I'd take them to Soho Road because it's iconic and I think it's underappreciated. I'd also take them to Handsworth Park because I think Handsworth Park is possibly one of the nicest parks in Birmingham. Again, it's underappreciated. I'd also take them to Edgbaston Reservoir because I like the reservoir. I've been a couple of times, but I've been amazed at how nice it is. In terms of what advice I'd give to a developer, let me go to Portloop, for instance. I know a little bit about Portloop. I think what the developers are trying to do, I don't know them that well. They are trying in terms of the houses are very expensive. However, there's a couple of what I call social movements who are actually on the development, who in time I think will bring more of a diversity into the development. I think, but everything takes time. Where development is concerned, I've got to understand that they're in it to make money. There may be some aspects about who it is they employ. Maybe they need to employ more of a diverse type of planner or a development planner. And I suppose it depends on where the planner actually stands, because some planners, urbanists, are interested in a place to make money. So who is it that we employ? You know, what is our positioning, our sort of standpoint as a placemaker? I can't remember what else you asked me, but so I'll stop there.
That's fine. That's perfect. I can't remember either, don't worry. Joe, last word to you. As again, feel free, you know, to answer whichever part you want. So yeah, over to you.
There's so many things I would like to say to developers, but I sort of think it's more I'm going to pose a question, because I sort of think, can we just think differently about how we create land value? And sort of, I know that we can't necessarily change capitalism and those profit models of sort of that's generated through the development process, but can we just have a different sort of conversation that really enables people's sort of emotional and sensitivity and sort of being a human being within the world, and sort of, and I think that interestingly that sort of Birmingham has sort of, you know, I guess it's sort of its sort of motto was sort of, you know, that picturing the artist and the engineer. I think Birmingham has a history of sort of working across with different disciplines and enabling sort of innovation to come out of that. And so I think that sort of that's probably, you know, something to work with. But in terms of sort of the three words that I sort of wrote down when I sort of thought what could represent Birmingham, I sort of said friendly, genuine, and it's a multiplicity, and sort of just to really hold that. But the three places I would take people to sort of visit, I'd take them to one of my gardens that's set in a hostel in Digbeth. I'd really like them to walk through that industrial landscape into that beautiful oasis that's sort of tended by people in a very vulnerable place. I'd like to take them to walk out of the city along the River Ray. The River Ray, like, sort of just takes you through the sort of the notion of what a city is and its expansion. And I'd also like to take them to sort of an artist studio and sort of really consider the sort of significance of sort of artists and thinkers helping us to develop meaning and understanding about the world that we live in. It's been an amazing conversation. I've really enjoyed listening to everybody. Thank you.
That's a perfect end. I'm going to ruin it now by talking. Oh, Deborah, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just remembered my 3 words, and I'm going to be honest about this. Divided, eclectic, and potential. I do think Birmingham is a very divided city because there are rich and poor here, and it's easy to see. I think it's eclectic in terms of the diversity, and also it's entrepreneurial. And I'm not sure, I think, like Aftab said, that we've recognised the entrepreneurial spirit of the communities that make up Birmingham. That includes the Black community. And also it has potential to be better.
Thank you. Well, I think we've gone over our time, but that was a really illuminating discussion. So first of all, I'm going to thank my panelists, Deborah, Joe, Aftab and Simon for that, and get well soon, Despa. It's going to be very difficult to try and sum this up or give any conclusion. So I've just got a list of words that seem to have come out quite strongly during this discussion. I think the first conclusion to say is that the cultural, creative, heritage sector is absolutely thriving in the city, across the city, in places that people perhaps don't know exist or don't know of. So there's some work to do in terms of shining light on those, but they're open for these discussions. And I think one of the words used was conversation. It's great to have these conversations. And I think what the cultural, creative and heritage sector can do in these types of policies, development, planning conversations is perhaps actually challenge those organisations from different sectors. We work in different sectors, we use different language, different vocabulary, but we can challenge you to think differently, whether you agree with the things that we say, you take on board the things that or the ideas that come out, but absolutely having those conversations will challenge both yourselves and our sector to think and maybe do things differently, however that manifests itself. I think key themes that come through are trust. How do we build trust, meaningful trust and meaningful engagement? Because when we do that, when we build those trust and those connections and have that engagement, then the world is a much better and different place. And I think the city itself will be a better and different place. There are issues around land values. Can we do things differently there, or at least have those conversations about sustainability? I think Aftab made a great point that we're so focused sometimes at looking at the big shiny things that we forget actually, you take a walk down into Les Halles or Alum Rock, Saltley, Ballsy Green, you see the vibrancy of those high streets that come through years and layers of migration into the city, and the culture that comes with that. It's absolutely fantastic when you go down those high streets. And so sometimes that narrative about the high street being dead isn't always as it is or as it appears. I think there's a discussion around gatekeepers and who are the gatekeepers. How do we connect with those gatekeepers? How do we bring through new gatekeepers to carry on these discussions? As we've said, it's a very young city. We're talking about a 20-year plan. In 20 years' time, I'm going to be almost 7. Well, I'll be over 70. Well, that's terrible. So, where is that generation coming through? How do we engage those younger generations who are now, coming in to find the city and live in the city? Where's their voice and how do they get them involved? And I think, the idea about being included in is critical. Again, meaningful inclusion. We talk about inclusive growth, including communities, engagement with communities, but actually it has to be worthwhile. It has to be meaningful. Those communities have to feel that they are being listened to and they are trusted to perhaps carry out and run and own and develop the city that they live, work and play in. So thank you so much for your time. This will be going out soon. The purpose of these webinars are to encourage different voices to engage in the process of how their city is shaped, and that is the name of the document. And there are different ways that you can do that. You can do it online, and all these will be posted in the comments or the post section below this video. You can do it online, you can do it in person through these webinars, or you can write into the City Council. It is absolutely critical that we have as many voices, different voices, as possible to help inform this plan, because it is, after all, our city. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.